Good evening, everyone. My name is Althea Wielden, and on behalf of the Amazing Grace Ministries at Heritage Community Church, welcome to this evening's presentation, How to Walk Alongside Those Who Have Experienced Trauma. The Amazing Grace Ministries here at Heritage was established almost 10 years ago to be a voice in our community to end slavery, bring freedom, and restore dignity to human trafficking survivors and to those vulnerable to exploitation. Our mission is to stand in the gap to end slavery, and the gap means that we show God's grace to all those impacted by human trafficking and any form of exploitation. We take part in advocacy to promote restoration, reconciliation, and reform. We raise awareness of modern day slavery in our communities and ways to respond, and we engage in prayer to seek wisdom, courage, and strength to carry out this mission. Tonight's program continues our series of community awareness presentations during January, which is National Human Trafficking Awareness and Prevention Month. This presentation this evening is being recorded, so you can refer back to it or invite friends that weren't able to join this evening to be able to take part in hear the presentation. We also wanted to comment that there's been some internet issues experienced by many people today. And so if our presentation is interrupted, please stand by. We will make every effort to resume and get us back on the air. At this time, I am turning the program over to Rick Harris, who is a member of the Amazing Grace Ministries team, who will introduce our topic and our speaker.
Good evening, all. My name is Rick Harris, and I would like to introduce our guest speaker this evening. I met Candace Wheeler soon after learning about my unique calling to the anti-trafficking work. While researching organizations committed to the restoration of those who have been trafficked, I came across the organization Candace founded, which was known at the time as Restoration Ministries. I joined the organization's ambassadors program, which has the vision to equip local believers through education to be effective advocates of those who are sexually exploited. I have volunteered in some capacity in assisting those who have been sexually exploited ever since completing the ambassadors program, whether in the area of advocacy, awareness, or restoration. I currently serve on the board of directors for the organization, which is now known as Restoration 199. Candace founded Restoration Ministries in 2003, but has been involved in social justice issues in the U.S. since 1988. She is a board-certified national counselor and holds a master's in clinical mental health counseling from Regent University in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and as a postmaster's certificate in spirituality and trauma from the School of Pastoral Counseling and Spiritual Care at Loyola University, Baltimore, Maryland. Her impact on the African American community in the DC metro area and her academic excellence resulted in her winning the Azusa Street Full Scholarship at Regent during her final year. Candace has a wealth of knowledge and experience in this area. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Candace Wheeler.
Well, thank you, Rick, for that warm introduction and just a welcome to everyone that's joining us tonight. I just want to say that it takes a great deal of courage to walk along beside anyone who has experienced trauma. And there's a right and there's a wrong way to help. And most of us, we have huge hearts and we want to help, but often the way that we help can be toxic. And so as Althea and I were talking, and Rick talking back this summer, what would be the most helpful, I kind of offered to do this workshop. And this is a small part of a larger workshop that we offer called Healing Conversations. It's about 7 hours, I think. So tonight you're gonna get a good taste of that and, hope that it will whet your appetite and that you will, wanna come back for a little bit more. So tonight we are going to just be focusing on the physiology of our bodies and our brains. Now, I am a born again Christian, and I believe that science and theology are not at opposite poles, but that they support one another. I mean, the Lord made our brains and He made our bodies, and He's given us the tool of science, I believe, in order to steady ourselves. So, um, I'm not a theologian, so I can't really bring um, the theology into this, but tonight we're just going to kind of focus on this physiology, and some of it may be very new for you. So hope that you will enjoy it and be able to take some really good takeaways from it. So one of the biggest questions I'm often asked is, how do we honor survivors? And as you know, it's a holy place. It's just such a holy place. We're walking on holy ground, and it is truly a privilege to hear another person's story. And it doesn't matter whether it's trafficking or any kind of violence or that someone has been through. It's just such a privilege to be able to hear their story, and we need to hold it with in a very sacred place and way. Um, so I'm sure that you've all heard the term trauma-informed care, and it's kind of the biggest buzzword right now, and everything wants to be trauma-informed, organizations and people. But what does that exactly mean? So I'm going to kind of give you a definition tonight, and it's the one that we work from. And it's a framework of thinking and interventions that are directed by a thorough understanding of profound neurological, biological, sociological, social, and spiritual effects trauma has on an individual. It recognizes that the person's constant interdependent needs for safety, connections, and ways to manage emotions or impulses. In other words, it is very holistic. Often, when people are going through trauma, they can feel that if it's someone from their church, maybe they're just focusing on the spiritual aspects of it, but then leaving some other parts of it out. I know when I've spoken with people who have addictions and they've been sent to a rehab center, they often have felt that the staff is focusing mostly on that addiction, but they're not focusing on the trauma. And so what we've learned is that we need to look at the whole person. We need to look at everything. So what is trauma? It's important that we start with a really good definition. And the one that we use here at Restoration 199 is trauma results in a fundamental reorganization of the way that the mind and the brain manage perceptions. It changes not only how we think and what we think about, but also our capacity to think. So one of the things that's really important as you are walking beside someone who has trauma is to first know what type of trauma that they have. And the mental health community has distanced themselves from focusing on the event. And that's what most people do. Our law enforcement will focus on the event. It's perfectly um, appropriate for them to do so. But with mental health, our focus is mostly how does the event impact the entire person? So we triage trauma survivors similar how medical professionals would, if there was a disaster of some sort. The first one is called acute trauma. And this simply means that the event happened one time, or they've only had one event that's been traumatic. It doesn't really matter what it is. It could be a rape. It could be a car accident. It could be anything, but it means that it just happened one time. Some of the things that you may be seeing in your loved one would be like hypervigilance, exaggerated startle response, misperceptions, or even some overreactions. The second type of trauma is what we call complex trauma. It simply means that the survivor has had more than one traumatic event. It doesn't have to be the same traumatic event, could be completely different things, could even be several years apart. But if they haven't worked through the first trauma, then when the second one comes along, it's going to be a layer on it, and it's going to be a lot more impactful for the brain and the entire body, and it's going to take longer to work through it. So some of those examples might be prolonged exposure to violence or bullying, profound neglect, acts of war, series of home removals, repeated sexual abuse, prostitution, and human trafficking. Some of the things that you might see in your loved one would be denial and psychological numbing, disassociation, rage, social withdrawal, a sense of a foreshortened future. The third type of trauma is what we call crossover. And this results from a single traumatic event that is devastating enough to have long-lasting effects. So an example might be a mass casualty school shooting like Sandy Hook, a car accident with fatalities involved, or a refugee dislocation. Some of the things that you might see in your loved one would be perpetual mourning or depression, chronic pain, concentration problems, sleep disturbances, or irritability. The reason that it's important that you know which category they fit into is it's going to set your expectations for treatment. So many times, the loved ones, the parents, the friends, the family, believe that their loved one has only experienced a one-time event, when the truth is it's been multiple events. They really do fit into complex trauma. And it just simply means to be prepared for a much longer recovery process. So the first thing that you need to know if you're going to help someone and walk along beside them is the neurobiology of trauma. And so what that really means is we need to understand how trauma impacts the brain and the body. Now, none of us are scientists. I'm not a scientist. We might have some scientists in the audiences tonight, but a lot of this information is fairly new to all of us. So I just want to say, be patient with yourself, and we're all learning, but it's really fascinating. And as we know that the brain it's a complex organ, has many, many, many parts. And so there is a psychiatrist by the name of Dan Siegel, and he is probably the leading child psychiatrist in the United States at the time. He's written a lot of parenting books. And if you're a new parent, maybe you've read some of them, but he needed a way to teach his young patients about the brain, about what was happening to them. So he came up with his hand model. And so he decided just to use his hand. And so this is our brain stem. This is what we call the reptilian brain. This is where our fight resides. This is what we have in common with reptiles. And this is the first part of the brain that is developed in utero. The second part would be the palm of our hand, and this is what we call the mouse brain or the mammalian brain, and this is where our emotions are. So we take our thumb. This would be our amygdala, which is the seat of our emotions. We fold it in. Then we bring our fingers down over the thumb, and the knuckles here, this is called our prefrontal cortex. So they refer to this as the triune brain. It's just a little bit easier to understand if we can put it in some of these three basic parts. And we're going to kind of go through this a little bit tonight. When a brain is healthy and fully functioning, we refer to it as being an integrated or a healthy brain. It just simply means that the body and the emotion, it has body and emotion regulation, it has empathy and attuned communication, and it has the regulation of stress. When trauma happens, we're going to see how the brain is completely impacted. So if you put up the first infograph, please. Yeah, that one. So you can see here, we have this picture of a threat, which would be like a lion. And we see that. And so the thing that automatically happens is our prefrontal cortex goes offline. This is where we are wired this way, and it does not mean that our brain is defective. I think a lot of people tend to think that it means when these things happen that their brain has been defective and their bodies betrayed them, and that is not true. Tonight is really important that we understand how the Lord wired us and how He made us. He made us to survive. So the lobes for our eyes are literally back here by our brainstem. And the reason for this is where our flight resides, right? So we see a threat, and we are going to, first thing we're going to say is, can we get away? And if we can, then we will. If we can't get away, then we are going to fight. And if we're not able to fight, then the body is automatically going to go into a freeze position. So what's important to know is when this prefrontal cortex kind of goes offline, this is our thinking part of the brain. It goes offline. And so the midbrain, our emotions, this is what kind of takes over. This is what is being activated at the moment. So this allows us to actually see and to hear better. All the blood in our body moves from our non-survival needs, which would be a digestion, immunity, and reproduction, and it goes directly to our muscles in case we have to fight, flight, or freeze. This also explains why some survivors, a lot of survivors, I would say the majority of the clients I have stomach, immunity, and muscular infertility issues. They're very common with people whose stress is turned on for more than 20 minutes a month. I was really surprised to learn this information, that our stress level should not be more than 20 minutes per month. And most of us are way over that level, aren't we? With COVID and everything else that is going on. So once a stress response is turned on during a crisis, the hippocampus goes offline with the prefrontal cortex as well. Now the hippocampus is in this midsection of our brain and is responsible for memory, for short and long-term memory. So the hippocampus works kind of like a video recorder, and it integrates the memories from all 5 senses. So trauma will always involve all 5 of our senses: our smell, our sight, the sound, what we're feeling, and what we're tasting. And it records all these so it can go into a story. What's important to know about this hippocampus is it does not make a video of the traumatic memory, but it stores bits and pieces that experience in this implicit memory or procedural memory instead of a normal memory narrative. And so the implicit memory does not make distinctions about time or place, and that's the reason that when people are triggered, they're going to have a flashback, or they're going to be triggered in one of the five senses. And so it feels like the event is happening at the moment. So if you want to scroll down this one to the next one, to the freeze right there. Again, if we are not able to fight or flee, then the body is going to go into a freeze state. And that's when a person may enter this freeze response, or even called feigned death. That's where part of the brain, where the muscles get really tight and freeze, the person could almost stop breathing. They're still alive. We can't really be in this state for very long. But I think what's important to know about all these different states that our brain can go in when we're experiencing trauma is that they're not a choice. And so often as helpers, what do? We tell them, you stayed because you wanted to. You could have gotten away, but you chose to stay, or you didn't do this, or you didn't do that. And that's when survivors tend to feel that their body betrayed them, or they feel their brain is defective. And it's not. This is the way that the Lord has wired us in order to survive. So go to the next infograph, which would be the brain-based approaches to help clients after trauma. So a lot of people, yes, thank you. When it comes to trauma healing, it shouldn't be a mystery at all. And I highly suggest, if you're walking along beside someone who has experienced trauma, it's really important that you understand what trauma recovery is all about. And that's not about getting into the details or sharing anything with you that is confidential, but trauma, healing from trauma is, and it just shouldn't be a mystery, and it is. And I think a lot of people tend to think that it's mostly seeing a therapist and repeating the trauma over. And we used to heal people that way, but what we're finding that that is not helpful at all. So one of the first things we want to do, what we use is what we call triphasic healing. There are 3 different distinct phases of healing that the survivor will move through. And it doesn't matter which type of trauma that they had, whether it was acute, complex, or crossover, they will still kind of go through these same phases, but maybe at different paces, depending on if it's an acute trauma, they can move through these phases fairly quickly. If it's a complex trauma, it's going to take longer. So the first phase is what we call safety and stabilization. And this is where we are helping the client use coping skills. I often, I will tell my client, a lot of them will come in and they don't want to talk about the trauma, or most of them don't have any words. They can't remember, and they just don't have the words to express what is going on. And with this infograph, we can see here what trauma kind of does to the brain. It doesn't physically separate it, but what we described before, that a healthy brain, all the parts are talking to each other the way they should. Trauma disrupts all this communication, and the prefrontal cortex goes offline, the one that causes us that helps us to do all of our executive functioning, our thinking, our reason and logic, and our words. Our words are in the left hemisphere of our brain. But what's activated for the majority of them is this midsection right here. This is where they're living. So as therapists, what we can do, we are there to help the client reintegrate their brain again, and we can either do that from the top down or the bottom up. So if you're familiar with CBT or cognitive behavior therapy, it would be a top down, but it would be mostly using reason and logic, mostly words. But if you have had a loved one who has experienced trauma, they may not be able to talk, right? So what we do at Restoration, the way we integrate is from the bottom up. And the language of the midbrain would be dance, movement, visual art, music, drama. Words don't reside in the mid section of the brain. And so we have to use these more expressive forms. And what it does, and they don't have the science to actually prove this, but we see it over and over and over again. It's somehow these expressive forms just literally go upward and link the midbrain to the more cognitive parts of the brain. I ran programs at 9 years at the Youth Detention Center and 5 years at the psych hospital. And that's where we saw a lot of trafficked youth. They would come in and they wouldn't have the words to talk, or maybe they just. So I would use a lot of art, and they would draw things out, and then they would be able to express it. I had one client that came in, and we were doing a lot of art with her. She came in one day and she said, I don't want to do any art today. I just really, really want to talk. I said, okay, it's fine. And things are going along pretty well until I asked her a specific question, and she opened her mouth and no words came out. But I could see the frustration on her face. It was kind of like, she was trying and the words just weren't there. So fortunately, I had pad of paper and drawing utensils there, and I asked her if she wanted to draw out her response. She just picked up the paper and just started drawing. I mean, it was just line drawings. She filled the whole thing in probably a couple of minutes, and then she turned it up and said, "Let me tell you what I drew." The words just came. So it's really pretty amazing. So that's one of the tools that you can use if you're with a loved one and they just seem to be stuck, and not able to talk. You could ask them if they want to draw out their response. I mean, you can use any kind of marking tool that you have. You can draw on a napkin, but there's something about that more expressive form that will just be able to unlink it, and then they'll be able to talk about it. Yeah, so it's really important to know those kinds of things, when you're working along beside someone. So in the safety and stabilization in this first phase, it is the longest and it is the hardest for everybody, for friends and family, for the survivor themselves, and for the therapist. They're often quitting therapy. They'll come for a few sessions, then they quit. They say it's too hard. I can't do this, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of what we start out with is using distress tolerance skills. So I will always tell my client, they don't have to tell me any details. if they don't want to. It's completely up to them to tell me what they want and when they want. And it can take a while to really kind of build up this rapport. So while we're doing that, I'm teaching them distress tolerance skills because most of them have what we call maladaptive behaviors, right? They're cutting, they're using drugs, they're doing these things that aren't very healthy. So we're trading those out for healthier coping skills, and that involves a lot of practice. You have to practice your skills. It's recommended about 30 minutes a day. And this is another thing that you can do to help them to learn these skills yourself and practice with them. It's always a lot better to be practicing with other people than, completely by yourself, but it's a lot of breathing. It involves some mindfulness. It's really what we're doing here is rewiring the brain to go in a more positive way, and that can take time. And sometimes we're having to grow neuroplasticity, and that brings us to the third infograph. And what we know now is that the brain is what we call plastic, and that just says that it's malleable and that it can change, and that's good news. We're all familiar with Freud, and Freud believed that everything was over by the age of 12. It was just done by then, and he also believed that the personality was set by age 12, and that the brain was completely set and it was hardwired and nothing could change. Thank goodness for technology, and we know that is not true anymore. So what we're doing in therapy is that we are going in and we are, in many cases, helping them grow neurons and connecting their brain in healthier ways. So we're having to grow these neural pathways where maybe none existed, or maybe some were there, but they were kind of faint. What we also know about the brain is that it never forgets anything. But if we don't use it, we will lose it and it will fade. And so that's the good news. And that's the reason why I think so many of them give up. And they say, well, this is really hard and I can't do it. And it is hard work because you're growing those new neural pathways. And it's tough for any of us. If you've ever have had to learn anything that was been challenging for you, this is what's happening. Our kids in grade school, they are growing new neural pathways every time they learn a new subject at school. Learning their math tables and equations and all those things. When science, history, all of that, it's all new, and they're growing their neural pathways. So mindfulness is the unit that we do after distress tolerance skills. And so what we've also learned about the brain, that regular practice, not sporadic practice, is what rewires our brain. So often clients will say, yeah, I sort of practiced. I did, like this and that, maybe 10 minutes the entire week. Well, that doesn't really cut it. They've got to practice about 30 minutes every day. And the more we practice, the easier that it gets. And what's also interesting, what we've learned is that when we're growing these new pathways, it also changes our brain physically and also chemically. So it will change our mood, our attitude, and our sense of well-being. And here's another thing about mindfulness practice and how it differs from like medications such as antidepressants. Meds will calm the reactive part, or that of this midbrain where they tend to be stuck, But mindfulness strengthens the parts that are related to compassion and positive mood. And so it helps us result and will give us better happiness, just not happier moods, but a happier disposition and personality. And of course, that takes time. The third unit that we do in this first phase is emotion regulation, and the third is interpersonal effectiveness. A lot of people will ask me, well, how long does it take? I mean, how many sessions? And it's kind of dangerous to put a number on that. Every client is different, but the more that they practice, the easier it will become, and the faster that they will move through therapy. The second phase would be what we call processing trauma memories. I think a lot of people, again, if you think of trauma therapy, it is mostly about just telling the trauma. But again, we don't want them to do that or to process those memories until they have really good coping skills. Because what happens when they talk about the trauma, they're going to get triggered, they're going to get activated, and what's going to happen if they don't have good coping skills, then they're going to do the maladaptive behaviors. That's when they can be suicidal, they're cutting, they're doing something that's self-harming, and we don't want to do that. So this is why it's really important to spend a lot of time in this first phase, and then the second phase goes fairly quickly, and we only use this if they are having like flashbacks or reoccurring thoughts that they can't seem to get rid of, and we use a lot of EMDR in this phase. It's also important to know that EMDR does not erase a memory. We can't do that. Like I said before, trauma, the brain doesn't forget anything. So those memories are always going to be there. What EMDR does is it changes the way that the client relates to the memory. It just makes it tolerable for them so that they don't have a flashback anymore. And when these things come up, they can't, it's okay with them. So that is kind of it, in a nutshell, that I kind of want to go over tonight. So that's kind of the first maybe hour or so of our Healing Conversation seminar. The other things that we would go over would that are helpful for you to know would be the role of attachment, how clients attach to others. We do some how to the types of language, how to choose your words carefully, when being with others, a little bit of motivational interviewing. And again, always, you've got to take care of yourself. We can often end up with compassion fatigue, and it's hard work walking along beside someone who has trauma, and we often will absorb their trauma. And so we have to be aware of that, and we've got to take some really good care of ourselves. So I just kind of want to open it up for any questions that anyone may have. Okay, a question is, do we use a sensation chart to help clients find the words to express what they are feeling, experiencing? We do. We often, because we do a lot of art, we do give them handouts on some words that they can choose if they have to describe their feelings and those kinds of things. Yes. Do you use drawing, dolls, stuffed animals, etc., for the client to attempt to express things they verbally cannot? It's mostly drawing. we've used some movement as well, because another thing that we need to remember is that trauma will also lodge itself in the body, and we will always feel our emotions in our body before we will know them in our head, always. And so many of my trauma clients don't have a very good mind-body connection. So that is where a lot of the movement comes in, where some of the mindfulness comes in. Some clients have used yoga, Pilates, anything that can kind of, slow them down and they can start to feel their emotions, in their body. I have worked a little bit with young children, and I use puppets with them, but I use animal puppets instead of people puppets. And it's really interesting for them to watch them kind of interact and do their little stories through puppets. How old are our clients? I will see clients starting at age 13. I've had them all the way up into, to their 60s. Here's something that's kind of interesting. Often, particularly people who are older, 50, and I would say older, I've had a couple who have been trafficked and didn't even know that they were trafficked, and people are quite shocked about that. But our middle and upper class communities are filled with trafficking survivors, and they aren't aware of it. So both of these women who came to me were trafficked within their own families as children, and they had no knowledge of it until they started having their own children. That's when everything started to fall apart for them, and they started going to therapy. It's also interesting that one of the clients had been in therapy for 25 years, and no therapist or psychiatrist had ever connected the dots and knew that she was trafficked. It wasn't until she came to see me, and within 5 minutes of her telling me her story, I just said, "Did you realize that you were trafficked?" And she said, "I always wondered, but I didn't know." And she said, "I'm so grateful that you were able to connect those dots for me." The other client, she had been in therapy for 5 years, and when I told her that my guess was that she had been trafficked, she was pretty defensive about it. She said, "No, I wasn't." And I said, "Well, I mean, I'm not an attorney, but according to my understanding, the legal definition that you were trafficked." And she was in therapy with another therapist at the time as well. That therapist called me and said, "Wow, you've opened up my eyes to what trafficking really is." I mean, the therapists were seeing the childhood sexual abuse, but they just didn't know that it was trafficking. Some of my colleagues on our team, they do work with younger kids. Working with children 12 and below, it's a specialty, and yeah, you can only work with them for about 15 or 20 minutes, depending on the age. So I prefer about 13 and above. Let's see. Because I'm not a professional, what can I do to help others who have experienced trauma? What would be the right approach? Well, again, being a friend, walking along beside them, being there, learning how to use active listening skills. And that's one of the things that we teach in our seminar. Active listening is very different from it's listening at a much deeper level, and it's being patient. It's not formulating your response while the other person is talking. I mean, you really have to really listen, and it's a skill that anybody that anyone can learn. Learning some motivational interviewing techniques is also that would be helpful. That's in our seminar as well. But I think one of the main things is not to blame them for what happened. What happened to them wasn't their fault, and to help them to understand that their bodies did not betray them either. Also, another thing that's I think that's really important to know is when people have what we call maladaptive behavior, and particularly Christians, we tend to see maladaptive behavior as sin. But it's really important to, even though their behavior may not make any sense to us, it always makes sense to the person with the behavior. It is their way of solving the problem. And what we need to do is to be patient, use our active listening skills, and be curious with kindness as to find out how their behavior is solving their problem. And they will tell you. But usually, it's not they do want to change it, they just don't know how to change it. And that's, again, those are those things that we can do in therapy. I think having a listening ear is extremely important. Do you have any book suggestions for people to read to expand our knowledge? Yes. If you have not heard of The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, highly recommend that you read the book. Bessel is probably the leading trauma therapist in the world, definitely United States. He's up in Boston. The book was written for clinicians and the lay community alike. There is a lot of technical terminology, but again, the more that you repeat the terminology, you'll get it. He does an excellent job of breaking down a very complex subject matter and making it so that the lay community, and even including clinicians, that we can understand it. We do not get any of this training in graduate school. People are really kind of surprised, but all we learn in graduate school is about therapy, and we don't learn to actually do it until we get out. And trauma is a specialty field, so then we spend a lot of money and take a lot of courses training ourselves in whatever specialty is. But yeah, check out The Body Keeps the Score. I think it's been on the New York Times best-selling list. And it might even have an audiobook too. I don't know. You can get it on Amazon. But yeah, check it out. I recently heard there is a fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. What are your thoughts on that? I'm not familiar with the fawn. I have not heard that term before. But the fight, flight, and freeze, we went over that at the beginning. The flight is in our brainstem here, and the fight and the freeze are in the midbrain. This is where they are. Yeah. So you can check out the recording if you missed that part. What are some signs we would watch out for that would show that we may not be adequately helping someone suffering from trauma? Excellent question. Okay, so whenever we're helping someone who has trauma, again, like I said, we're going to absorb it ourselves, and we are often triggered again with our own trauma. And it's really important that if we find ourselves being triggered, and you'll know that when that happens, might have it might just cause some difficulty again with sleep. You might find yourself very irritable. There are a lot of different things, and kind of look back to see what the trauma was and what some of your issues were with that. Even though we've had healing, we can still get triggered. It's important to know when you're being triggered and to go get help from that. So you might need to pull back a little bit. Yeah, it's really important. Again, when we can't pour from an empty cup, and so often people want to help others because they see it as a way of healing for themselves, and that's not what it is. All you're going to do is you're going to open up yourself, and you're going to cause more hurt and pain for someone else. So if you know that you've been through trauma, go and see someone to make sure that you're ready to start helping, and also to be aware when, to set some healthy boundaries. We all have to be able to set healthy boundaries, and we go over a lot of that in our healing conversation course to help you to be able to determine that. Have you seen any issues with clients being overwhelmed with emotions when doing the breathing exercises? Yes. I recently heard a therapist mention that the breathing can trigger an emotional response. It can. In fact, some of my trafficking clients, the one who'd been in therapy for 25 years, she came to see me because her anxiety was all over. It was off the wall. It was off the charts. She had had a lot of extensive therapy. Again, the therapists were working on the traumatic memories, but nobody helped her with her anxiety. So doing the breathing, she said it was really emotional for her because when she was trafficked as a child, she was often choked. And so we just have to go slower. We have to rework it a little bit. There are a number of different kinds of breathing techniques. So if one isn't working for the client, then we can go to some others. But we all breathe, and we all have to breathe in order to live. So it's there are some things that we can do to help them with that. How is a client's trauma absorbed? What does it mean, and how does it play out? Again, well, it's going to be absorbed in the body for one thing, and that's where we have to work with it. Not only work with it in the mind, but a lot of these distress tolerance skills that we teach them in phase 1. Mindfulness is really, really good. And so we break mindfulness down into a couple of different components. We will have, I teach mindfulness through visual art, I teach it through the body, and I teach it through self-compassion. So, and then they have these exercises and they have to go, I teach them in the session, and then they have to practice these about 30 minutes a day during the week. Can you re-explain how the trauma affects the thinking process and the executive functioning? Sure. So if it's a healthy brain, before the trauma happened, all the parts are talking to each other the way they're supposed to. Trauma comes in and this prefrontal cortex goes offline. It's supposed to, because we need this emotion part of our brain, right? If we have to sit here and think if someone's in trouble or if we're in trouble, it could be too late. We've all heard the stories where the news reporter is interviewing what we call the hero, who saw someone in distress and just ran over and helped, right? And the news reporter will always say, well, what were you thinking when you saw that person in distress? And the hero will say, well, I didn't think anything, right? I just saw them in distress and it went over. So if we had to sit there and think, well, are they really in trouble? I don't know. It's going to be too late. This is why this prefrontal cortex has to go offline. The lobes for our eyes are back here by the brainstem, which means get into action. As I explained, all of our the blood in our body goes right to to our muscles so that we can fight or flight or flee. This is just the way that we're designed. We are wonderfully made, like Scripture tells us. So these info graphs are going to be made available to you. And if you read Bethel's book, it goes into a lot more explanation for that. So that will help you, or sign up for our seminar. Where can we find trauma-informed care therapist? Any therapist who says that they are focusing trauma, then they should be trauma-informed. You can certainly ask questions. There should be, some information on their website about that. If not, send them a couple of emails. We have a Maryland therapist, and she is a traumatologist. She's excellent. So, yeah. And again, that's a big buzzword, and it can mean a lot of different things, but just ask if you're not sure. What does it mean to absorb your client's trauma as their helper? Well, we all have been around people who have had a lot of grief, who've been through something traumatic, and we tend to take it in. We're kind of like sponges, and we absorb their feelings, and some people more than others. But again, you're going to start to feel these things in your body, be aware of it, have a lot of accountability, and to know that when these things happen, it's normal. It happens to therapists all the time. We just have to be aware of it. That's all, and to take care of ourselves. This is one of the reasons that self-care is so important when you're walking along beside someone, and having accountability. If you are, say, at your church, and you're helping like specific groups of people, I would highly recommend that if you are walking along beside individuals or even groups of people where you're interacting, that there be someone that you can go and talk to, mostly a professional, not so much your pastor, unless they've had some clinical training. It might be good just to have a therapist come in, once a month and meet with everybody and do a lot of, so you have a place to talk and a place to talk about what's going on with you personally. How can we fight the tendency to also feel ghost-like, the trauma that they are experiencing? Well, again, this is, kind of like absorbing the trauma. You just have to know that more than likely this is going to happen. And the more training that you can have of knowing what's going on with them, knowing what's going on with yourself, it's a lot of awareness is, what it is. Having your accountability set up for you, that people that you can go to and talk through these things, and doing your self-care, that will help you go the distance. I think a lot of times helpers aren't forthcoming with what they're experiencing because they're afraid that they are going to be told that they're not good enough, or they need to quit, or that sort of thing, when the truth is they just need help kind of working through it, and stepping back for a season or even a short time doesn't mean that you're not good enough and that you need to quit. It just simply says you need to be aware of what's going on and take care of yourself. I think we're very close to being out of time. You've mentioned breathing. Are you using meditation techniques, and how long is the session? My sessions are an hour, and we do use breathing. I teach my clients about 5 or 6 different types of breathing techniques in phase 1, and they need to practice those. They're going to find the ones that they like, the ones that they don't like. I have my clients make flashcards because they're learning a lot of different tools. What we're doing is we're just helping them build out their toolbox, to a really big toolbox, and to know how to use different ones in different situations. So they not only practice these skills for about 30 minutes a day. You can break it up into morning, noon, and night, or morning and night, whatever works. But the important thing is to be able to set this time aside and to be able to, to practice those, and then to use it when situations come up. So they also have to do a diary card for me, and I want to see, have they been triggered, and if so, what happened, and what distress tolerance skill did they use? Was it helpful? That sort of thing. Is it possible to do these things and struggle with codependence? Yeah. I would say the majority of my clients are in codependent relationships, but that's what therapy is all about. Where their support network is extremely important. And I want to say this, your role as a helper is extremely important, because they will not get well without you. A lot of people get well without therapy, but if they don't have a healthy support system, they're not going to get well. You can't grow. It's like being in toxic soil, and what's going to happen? The plant is going to die. So it's really, really important that their support system is healthy, and we're always looking at strength. Great. Well, thank you for your participation tonight. I hope that it was helpful, and would love to see you all come back for our seminar for the full healing conversations.
Thanks for taking time to share with us this evening on this very important topic and how we can walk alongside those that have experienced trauma. You indeed have a wealth of knowledge and have given us a lot to think about. Thank you for the work you're doing at R199 and the impact you're having in helping survivors of complex trauma. To all who have joined us this evening, we wanted to make you aware of a way that you can support Candace and the work Restoration 199 is doing. The organization has an economic empowerment program for survivors of sexual trauma, trafficking, which is called Eden Herbal Products. So if you visit R199's website, you can check out the handcrafted home, bath, and body products for sale. These products are made of the highest quality herbs and also natural ingredients. I personally purchased some over the Christmas holidays for family and friends, and can attest that they are very well made. What you see here are some products that are being made available for Valentine's. And so this gives you an idea of what's available. But you can see the link there, or the URL for the website where you can go to find the products and support R199 if you'd like to do that. So again, thank you, Candace, for sharing with us this evening. Thank you all for joining us. And we had a few closing remarks from Althea.
Thank you, Candace, and thank you, Rick. Wow, I have lots and lots of notes. I also have the book, The Body Keeps Score, and I have been reading it, and it is an excellent, excellent book to help you really begin to understand that mind-body connection, and just, how trauma just stays inside the body. I just want to remind you, this presentation has been or is being recorded, and it will be posted on the Heritage Community site, Community Church Facebook page, as well as their YouTube channel. I am intending to go back and review this, because there were a lot of things I just want to revisit. So we invite you to do that, and we invite you to share that with other people. We also have an Amazing Grace Ministry Facebook page, so please check that out. We do try to post things out there and let you know of upcoming events. I certainly am interested in the trauma seminar, healing conversations. And so check that, and we'll let people know what we're doing. We also have a big event coming up in April. It is our annual Dash for Dignity. Yay, there's the slide. It is virtual. So that means that you can run it any day, any time, any course during the entire month of April. If you go to the dash4dignity.com website and check it out, you'll get all the information. We have a newly designed web page, so please check it out. And if you know of folks that would like to sponsor the event, participate in the event, fundraise for us, we invite you to do that. Again, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for all of your questions, and have a great evening. And I look forward to doing another event with everyone in the near future. Good night, everyone.